Just a few items to talk about. Everybody is on listen only mode, and we're going to keep it in listen only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put those into the Q&A box. If they're appropriate, I will try and jump in and ask our presenters to answer the questions throughout the presentation. If that becomes too cumbersome, we will save the question and answers to the end of the presentation. After the program is completed, all attendees will receive a survey from the U.S. Commercial Service. So please complete this short request. It helps us to develop future educational programming for you, the U.S. exporter. So it's really important. If you can do that for us, it would be greatly appreciated. I'll send out all the recording to all the registrants when it is ready, either later today or tomorrow. And we also like to give the disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation may not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government. I'd like to take a minute to inform you about the U.S. Commercial Service for any of those of you who are attending who have not worked with us at this point. We're the trade and investment arm of the U.S. federal government, a division of the International Trade Administration. Our mission is to promote U.S. exports, protect U.S. commercial interests abroad, and facilitate foreign direct investment into the United States. We have a global reach, and we have over 100 offices domestically and internationally. Our offices are located within U.S. embassies and consulates in over 70 countries. So with that, and today we have joining us Jay Charkow and Jill LaMadeleine from International Tariff Management. And Jay Charkow is the president of International Tariff Management. He received his bachelor's in chemical engineering from Syracuse University, an MBA from the University of Hartford, and is a licensed customs house broker. Before co-founding International Tariff Management in 1982, he had a diversified career with Uniroyal Inc., holding various senior management positions. Jay is well versed in the intricacies of the drawback regulations, foreign trade agreements, and the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. He has lectured on tariff management topics at the National Council on International Trade Development, PMA conferences, and numerous individual corporate meetings. He's an active member of the AAEL and the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association of America. So welcome, Jay. And Jill LaMadeleine is the Vice President of Operations at International Tariff Management. Jill received her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Ithaca College and is also a licensed custom house broker. Jill joined ITM in 1994 and has worked with many companies across numerous industries in managing hundreds of assignments involving duty drawback, classification analysis, and USMCA certification. So thank you again, Jill and Jay, for joining us, and I will turn the presentation over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Jackie, thank you very much. We always appreciate working with your organization. As you know, duty drawback, which we will get into, is very much tied into exports. And the companies that export would have a great opportunity to participate in duty drawback. As you mentioned, the company has been around for 40 years. We work with U.S. Customs for that long. And we do not get involved, we're licensed customs brokers, as you mentioned, but we do not get involved in movement of goods. Our focus is primarily on helping companies recover overpaid duties and also avoid paying duties that are unnecessary to be paid. We do this helping companies be compliant with all of the customs regulations. And We'll go over just briefly a few of the business services we have. If we move to the next slide.
Yes. So while Jay mentioned we do specialize in duty drawback, classification reviews, and free trade agreements. And these are services that benefit companies that both import and export. But we'll talk about it later. You don't have to be an importer and or an exporter in order to take advantage of the services we provide. But what we're here to talk about today and what the bulk of our services are is duty drawback. And duty drawback is a refund from the U.S. Customs Service for 99% of the duties paid on imported items, which are subsequently exported or used in the manufacture of exported goods. And this refund is available to you even if you are not importing the goods, as well as if you are not exporting the goods. And we'll talk about that as we go further on in the presentation.
Yeah, one of the other things we do, again, only in dealing with United States Customs Service, is classification. It's extremely important when goods come into the country that they're properly classified. There's penalties if they aren't, and there could be a significant amount of duty that's overpaid if indeed the improper classification is put on. So that is another function that we perform for companies that do importation into the United States.
And the third service that we provide is free trade agreements. We help companies navigate taking advantage of the free trade agreements that are in place. And currently there are 14 free trade agreements in effect in the United States with 20 different countries. So we'll coordinate with a company to put those in place so that they can take advantage of them.
What we're going to specifically talk about today is duty drawback. And duty drawback is, as Jill explained, an opportunity to get back refunds from the government. There are about $5 billion available in refunds that are going unclaimed every year. This is primarily because many companies are not aware of the opportunity. And the other reason is many companies are aware of the opportunity and they don't want to be bothered with the details that are involved in trying to get the drawback. Drawback is very complicated. It goes back to a law that started in 1789. And it's been modernized over the years, and it really gives companies an opportunity to recover, especially in these days, the duties that are being charged by China on the 301 tariffs. If you've signed into this, you probably have some knowledge of the fact that they're very significant duties. And these duties can be reclaimed if indeed you do export the product that you have imported.
So there are three main types of drawback. There's unused merchandise drawback, manufacturing drawback, and rejected merchandise drawback. For all three types of drawback, the exporter of record is entitled to claim, but the exporter of record can waive that right through a waiver and transfer its right of drawback to another party. Unused drawback covers items that are imported, subject to operations that are only considered incidental in the United States before being exported. Some of these incidental operations can include inspecting, testing, cleaning, repacking. The list goes on, but if your product falls within that realm of not being used in the United States, you would file drawback under unused drawback.
One of the other provisions for drawback is manufacturing drawback. And this very directly is the fact that you import raw materials, you take them into your manufacturing process, and you make something else out of them, and they get exported out of the United States. There are two types of manufacturing drawback. One is where you can directly identify the components that come in. For example, automotive, you're bringing in serial numbered transmissions. You bring them into your manufacturing plant. The car then gets exported. You can directly identify which transmission came in to your product and being exported. There's also in manufacturing drawback substitution, which allows you to bring any transmission in. It doesn't have to be the exact one that's been put into that automobile and substitute one for the other. We will get into a little more details about how manufacturing works, manufacturing drawback, a little later in the presentation.
And rejected drawback covers the destruction of imported merchandise which does not conform to sample or specification. It could also cover a product that's been shipped without the consent of the consignee, or merchandise that has been determined to be defective at the time of importation. An example of something that might be subject to rejected merchandise drawback could be food with an expiration date, products that don't meet a spec of what you had ordered from the vendor. These are all items that would qualify under rejected merchandise drawback. So this is sort of a flow chart to indicate all the scenarios that are available for unused merchandise drawback. And if you follow the different arrows, there are different scenarios. Following the red arrow, you have a cell phone that comes into your warehouse in Texas, and it's subject to incidental operations. Maybe it's repackaged, it's inspected, and then it's shipped out. That's one scenario for unused merchandise drawback. And the other ones you can follow in different successions. So if you follow the green arrow at the top and the cell phone comes in, you buy it from your vendor and import it into and bring it into your warehouse in Texas, and then you export it. You're not the importer of record, but you can claim the drawback when you export the cell phone. You need to go back and obtain the necessary information from the importer of record in order to put that program together. And then if you follow the other side of the green arrow, you may sell your cell phone domestically and your customer is exporting it. And this is a scenario where you can get those rights signed back to you if your customer is the exporter of record. So as you can see from this chart, you don't need to be the direct importer or the direct exporter in order to claim drawback.
The next type of drawback to be discussed is the manufacturing drawback. As you can see from the chart, in this case, we're going to talk about steel coil. Steel coil on the left could come directly into your factory, which is again in Texas in this picture, and you put that into your car and you export the car. If that scenario is what you do, then you can get back the duty that you paid on the steel coil upon importation when that car is exported from the United States. There are other examples. As Jill pointed out, you need not be the direct importer or exporter. In this particular case, if you file the red arrow, it could go up to a warehouse. Somebody else could be the importer of the steel coil. You can then buy it from the company that warehouses it, put it into your automobile, and then export the automobile directly. And in that case, you can also get the drawback on the duty that was paid on the steel coil. The steel coil can also be imported by someone else up into the warehouse. It can then go into another factory where they make something else out of it, which you then buy from that manufacturer. And that can go into your car and you can export it and also get the drawback. So you need not be the importer, you need not be the direct importer of it, and you can also buy a good that was manufactured by someone else that goes into your product, that when it gets exported, you can claim drawback. The other issue here is, as Jill pointed out, for unused, the same thing applies to manufacturing drawback. You need not be the exporter. You might sell your finished product, in this case it's a car, to somebody else, and this goes up into the area of Pennsylvania on a chart, and that individual can then be the exporter. So you could get back the duties that were paid either directly as the importer, indirectly as the importer from somebody else, or as a product that was manufactured by someone else from the export that someone else did. So again, we want to emphasize there could be opportunities where you are not the importer or the exporter, but still have an opportunity to reclaim some of the drawback.
And in order to put together a drawback program, you need to provide an audit trail. And that's what this slide is showing. You need to show the product coming into the country. You need to show coming into inventory, involved in production if it's a manufacturing program, coming out of inventory, and then out for export. And we'll talk a little further on about what's required from CBP in order to follow items all the way through that audit trail.
So after what we've discussed, the whole purpose of this presentation is to determine if you have an opportunity for drawback. So the things to look at are, do you import the goods? Do you pay a duty? Do you source goods domestically that are important or imported and paid by someone else? Do you export the goods? Do you ship things that you've imported or that you buy from an importer out of the country? We've developed a simple test to determine if there is an opportunity. And it's a very simple mathematical on-off switch. Figure out how much duty you pay directly and indirectly. Directly is easy to see because you can look in your ACE portal and find out how much you've paid. Indirectly requires you to go back to your vendors and find out if indeed they import certain products that you do. But once you determine how much duty you pay or think you pay, directly or indirectly, then you can figure out what is your exports. Let's say, for example, you pay $100,000 worth of duty a year, and you export 10% of your product. A good guess at it is you could probably get back somewhere in the range of 10% of the 100,000 or $10,000. So it gives you kind of a ballpark number, as I mentioned, an on-off switch to see if it's worth taking it to the next step. One thing you must remember in drawback is the approval process is quite arduous. It's difficult to work through customs to get the approval, so that the opportunity must justify it. If you're going to get back $5,000 after you do this quick analysis, it's probably not worth it. Maybe you should wait till your exports get a little larger, or if you pay more money on your imports. So you should be looking at a program where your opportunity is in the $50,000 to $100,000 recovery. If you're not sure how much you're going to get back, we would be more than happy to analyze that to see if the opportunity was worth getting involved in the task of moving forward.
I think it's also important to mention here that drawback is not limited by industry. It's available to anyone who pays significant amounts of duty, and we've worked with industries across multiple types of industries, automotive, as we mentioned before, apparel, jewelry, medical, industries.
Yeah. And also machinery, food industry, chemical industry, sporting equipment.
Any industry that pays a significant amount of duty would be able to put together a drawback program.
Great, and I have a question in the chat for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And the question is, how do you handle a situation when you have a vendor who is importing a product that they are then including in a product they're manufacturing, but the vendor does not want to let them know what the duty is on their ingredient because it would expose their costs?
Very good question. We're asked that question all the time. The way that's handled, and we have many, many clients that have exactly that situation, is we are very comfortable, and in many cases, your vendor would be very comfortable in signing a non-disclosure secrecy agreement. We take the information from your vendor. We take the data that we need to generate the drawback claim, and we do not share that with your client or our client. We then put in the drawback claim, and that data stays between U.S. Customs, ourselves, and your vendor. It is never shared with the person who is worried about giving up their pricing. It's a very common question.
Great, thank you.
The interesting thing about drawback is that if you're thinking of starting now, you can go back 5 years. If you forgot about it, if you weren't aware of it, if you thought that, well, maybe I didn't have an opportunity, but over the last 5 years, there is an opportunity, you can go backwards. The key limiting factors on the left of this chart is the date of importation of the merchandise. You have up to 5 years from that date to file your drawback claim, all the way over on the right side. So there's an opportunity, if you start drawback today, to go back 5 years on your imports and claim not 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years, but 5 years worth of exports to add to your duty drawback program.
So most of the data required to file duty drawback is the same basic data or documentation that you would accumulate in your normal course of business. The import data that's required is, the majority of it is found on the entry summary, and then the remainder on the accompanying commercial invoice, and in some instances you may need a packing list. If you're not the importer of record, you would also need to get authorization from the importer to use in order to use their entries in your program. If it's a manufacturing program, you would also require bills of material for the products upon which you're going to claim drawback, inventory records that would include showing the receipt at factory date, the use of the imported merchandise in the finished article, the finished goods coming out of inventory. You would also need the date it was exported and any waste that was generated as a result of the manufacturing process. And on the export side of things, you would require the export commercial invoice and the export bill of lading showing the products actually leaving the country. If you're not the exporter of record, you would need to obtain an export waiver from the exporter or an affidavit that would transfer the rights back to you as the claimant for the drawback. And all of the documents pertaining to drawback claims, because we're dealing with customs, need to be maintained for at least 3 years after a drawback claim has been liquidated. And customs has 1 year from the date of claim to liquidate it, but can extend that 3 times. So theoretically, you should be saving all of this data for as long as 7 years it could be. So it's important to save all the backup information for any drawback claim that you submit to U.S. Customs.
It's also interesting to point out when we started this 40 years ago, when the law was started in 1789, that was a few years before that, but all of the documentation was paper. And today, many people have the data in various electronic formats. And it should be noted that much of the import data that's required can be gotten through the customs ACE, Automated Commercial Environment System. Also, the import information can be gotten through the broker, your customs broker, wherever imports your materials. And on the export side, or on the bill of materials side, everything today is electronic. You have all of this information in your sales reports, what the bill of lading was, to which customer it went, what export it was, what was on the export. So the amount of data accumulation, the documentation that's required, is not as cumbersome as it had been in the past.
Great,
So,
thank you. Nope, sorry, Jay, go ahead.
no. So the point is, we want to thank you for listening. The real opportunity here is if you're just starting to export, you should look at Drawback. If you're a long-time importer and exporter and you really haven't grabbed onto it, you should start looking at it again because of the difference in the 301 tariffs and other things like that. And just remember that you need not be the importer directly or the exporter directly to participate and enjoy the fruits of a Drawback program. And again, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And we have some questions in the Q&A. The first question from Cheryl is, can you speak to the duty reclamation process on imported goods that are being scrapped? If USC decides not to observe the scrapping process, what passes as satisfactory proof of destruction?
Jill is an expert in destroyed goods merchandise.
I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize. I was playing around with putting my camera back on. Would you repeat that one more time?
Sure. So the question is, can you speak to the duty reclamation process on imported goods that are being scrapped? If USC decides not to observe the scrapping process, what passes as satisfactory proof of destruction?
Okay. Customs has set a precedent that in order to file for destruction, you need to make sure that there's no commercial value left to that product. So often it needs to be scrapped in a way that makes it valueless. So it needs to be destroyed beyond compare, and it depends on the different products as to what that mode would be.
And so, Jill, is there something that a company would be able to utilize as proof of that destruction?
Well, typically we advise our clients to get an affidavit from the facility where they destroy the products, or whoever comes in-house to destroy the products, certifying that the items have no more value. And that is acceptable by customs if they can prove by the person who did the destruction that it has been taken care of.
Perfect, thank you. All right, the next question is, for manufacturing Drawback, is there a time frame to export from importing? You know, so in order to claim duty drawback, does it have to be exported within a certain amount of time from the importation?
It's that same 5-year window that we talked about. So everything needs to have happened within that 5 years. So when you import the product into manufacture through to export, all has to have occurred within that 5-year window.
Fantastic, thank you. And could you recommend have any suggestions on the best way to speak with your vendors or exporters about giving rights to the duty drawback? But I think you may have answered this a little bit when you were indicating that you would have parties sign an NDA, and so the importer of record wouldn't have to really disclose to the person they're selling the product to what their costs were. They're disclosing that to you, and then kind of behind the scenes, the tariff management would be taking care of that, and then just the money would then go to the exporter of record or the manufacturer. Is that correct?
Well, yes, that is correct, Jackie. But I think the question, at least the way I read it, is because we run into this all the time, is how do I approach my vendor? How do I go to him and say, I really want to get this information, but I don't want to tell you, I don't want you to have to tell me what my pricing is. And I think you're exactly right. We approach it with our clients to say, number one, if you are really a very good vendor, you want to help me stay in business. You want to help me reduce my costs the best way you can. And part of that is if you give me these drawback rights, if you give me this information, when I export, I can be more competitive, and I can therefore keep my business going and get more business. And also emphasize the point that you made and that I made earlier, is that this documentation, this information is secret. It is not transmitted to the client or the person that's approaching the vendor. And it's worked over the last 40 years. We keep our mouth shut, the vendor keeps their mouth shut, and the drawback is recovered, and everybody wins, except the government, and they can afford to pay a few dollars out.
Great, thank you. And another question, many of the imports come via DHL or FedEx. Are they, and I guess duties are charged to their account? Are these duties collectible or retrievable through the duty drawback program? Would they be handled the same manner?
This is, again, it's a new thing. It wasn't thought of back in 1789. This is e-commerce. And that's the way many of the things are done. The DHL, FedEx, UPS, all have the data in their system available to present, as Jill had pointed out, what documentation is required for drawback. So all of that documentation and data is available, and yes, these people will be and have been cooperative in presenting that information to allow to move forward for a drawback program.
Excellent. And a question, how long does this process usually take in the scenario where all parties have agreed and you get the documents? So once that agreement has occurred and you're going to move forward from start to finish, how long does that typically take?
On our side, to set up a drawback program typically takes about 6 weeks to 3 months to set up the program and submit the approvals to CBP and start accumulating the documentation or support data from the claimant. Where you run into a little bit of a delay is with customs getting the approvals, and once you get the approvals you can push everything through, and that usually takes about 6 to 9 months from the start of the program. And once you have those approvals, it becomes an automated experience where you can continue to file.
Excellent.
And that timeline, by the way, is a function of the staffing at CBP and the drawback departments. There's a lot of requests coming in. They're overloaded. I don't know, we didn't get into it, but the drawback law just changed. There's new regulations, there's new ways of doing drawback, which, by the way, have opened up some significant opportunities for drawback. I might have just added here because it's a good point that was missed. Drawback used to be done by SKU number. You used to have to follow from product imported to product exported. It's now done by the harmonized tariff number. So if you import one harmonized tariff number and export a similar thing with the same harmonized tariff number, you can still get drawback. And CBP adjusting to the new regulations themselves have delayed this approval process, but the numbers Jill gave you are correct.
Fantastic. I have a question here. Are companies required to have an additional customs bond for drawback in addition to the standard 301 continuous bond?
Yes, when you file duty drawback, you need a drawback bond to cover the amount that you're claiming drawback on. And you can do this in two ways. It can be a continuous bond, such as your importer's bond, or you can get a single transaction bond with every drawback submission. So there are two options in order to get that bond coverage.
Great, thank you. Then we have a question. Our company has done a lot of inventory transfer in the U.S. due to transitioning of manufacturing in order to avoid paying SEC 231 U.S. additional duty from CN. We pay duties on the transferred goods in the U.S. We still own the goods. Then the demand back of those inventory is needed in Canada. Can we recover those duties paid under the duty drawback program?
I'm not quite sure of all the numbers but the bottom line is if you've imported something into the United States and paid a duty on it, then if that material leaves the United States, you're entitled to get back 99% of the duties. So if it's an ownership issue, again, that can be addressed by the fact that rights can be transferred over. And if I haven't answered that question, if somebody would contact us, our email is on the thing, I'd be happy to dig into it and give a more specific answer.
Great. And then I do have, I saved this question for last because it's a little bit of a comparison and I'm not sure. So they want to know if you can talk a little bit about the difference between TIB versus duty drawback.
Sure.
Don't know if that discussion would be too long for our format today, but so I'll leave that to you.
No, TIB for whoever asked it knows what it is, but for the other people that might not know, it's a temporary import bond. The point is, if you're going to bring something into the United States and sure that it's going to leave in the same condition that it's leaving, a TIB is a viable alternative. The problem is if it comes in and something changes and you violate the conditions of the import bond, there could be penalties involved. So if you're sure that something is coming in and is going to go out, sure, why pay the duty in the first place? Makes sense. But if you're not sure, there could be ramifications down the road if you do it and do not comply with the stipulations under the TIB.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to thank Jay and Jill today, and I just wanted to say how much we appreciate your time and effort, reminding everybody that I will be sending out the recording of this program. And I also wanted to mention before we ended that for any of you who are located in the Northeast or anywhere around the country and you're anywhere in the marine ocean technology industries, we do have a large event coming up in September in Providence, Rhode Island. Please feel free to check out our website. And for any further information, you can reach out to me. You should have received my contact information. These are the top sectors. I'm not going to leave this off for very long because it's a pretty long slide. I'm going to leave you off with our website address and additional information. And I will also, if anybody has any questions, as I said, you should have received my email address in your registration. Please feel free to reach out to me. And of course, if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to Jay or Jill. I'm sure they would be happy to see how they could assist you. So that concludes our program for today. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I'm going to disconnect at this time. If the presenters can stay on the line, that would be great. Thank you.